Hello, this is Luke, and we're back with another episode of building a self-hosted analytics service from scratch. I gave some thought as to what I wanted to work on today. We've got some notes here, and the thing I would like to do is this, dashboard auth. Now, auth is an abbreviation, and it's kind of a deliberately ambiguous abbreviation, which is interesting. It's both authentication and authorization, which both start with auth. So which one are we talking about here, and what's the difference? I kind of want to take a moment and talk about authentication and authorization in an abstract way. If you are already an experienced engineer, there's probably going to be nothing new to you with this, but I do also find that it's something that people, especially web developers, really need to know and often don't really have a good understanding of the difference and what they mean. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit here. So first of all, when do we need to use authentication and or authorization? It's when there's behavior that we need to control access to, whether it's reading data, editing data, sending emails, connecting to another system, whatever it might be. If there's some kind of data or some kind of interaction that you need to control access to limit it to certain users or certain situations, certain other systems, for example, they don't have to be users. That's when you need to think about authentication and authorization. So to use a simple example here, suppose we have a microblogging service that we're trying to build. And in this service, we have posts, right? This is like an entity in our microblogging service. You could think of it as an entity, an object of a class, a row in a database, a resource in a RESTful model. It doesn't really matter. And this entity, there are certain operations that you can perform on it. You can edit it. You can edit the post, change the content of it. You can delete it. And you can also view it. And this is a simplification, right? I'm just trying to get the point across here. So say you have this entity, you have these three operations for it. Let's turn this into a group and make a couple of these. Okay, so, again, supposing this is a microblogging service or a forum or something like that, any user is able to view any post, right? They're basically public posts. And so we can kind of draw this line here to say any user is able to view any post. And for that, you don't really need any authentication or authorization. Now, if you have to be a user, meaning you literally have to be logged into the app with a username and password or something like that, then you need authentication. That's the authentication part, and I'll get into that in a minute. But if it's just a post that's publicly available on the internet, all you have to do is go to the page, then you don't need authentication. And maybe let's actually just say anyone instead of any user to avoid the confusion there. Okay, so then what about editing and deleting, right? Only the user who created the post is able to edit it. So let's say user A created post A. User A is able to edit it. And user A also created post B, so they're able to edit that as well. And they're also able to delete these posts, right? So we're coming up with, these are authorization rules. And there's different terms for them depending on what system you're using. It can be called a policy, can be called rules, whatever. But basically it's a set of rules that we need to enforce about who is allowed to do what. And down here, user B can edit and delete post B or post C or whatever this post is, I guess. Okay. Now, and maybe I'll add a little note here. Created by user A. And this one's also created by user A, and this one's created by user B. Okay. Now, maybe there's also a moderator role, right? So there's somebody who's a moderator. And This person is able to delete posts, anybody's post, but they're not able to edit posts, right? Like that. And then maybe there's also an admin, an administrator. This is maybe the person who runs the site. And they probably have access to the database. So they can access this data directly without even following the authorization rules. There's no point in limiting their access at the application layer because it's not securing anything because of their unlimited access to the database. So we give them the ability to edit and delete anything. They can just do whatever needs to be done in the application. Not every application follows these rules. This is just an example, right? And it can get much more complicated than this. And of course, all of these user types fall into this bucket of anyone as well. So they, of course, can still view any of these other posts. Now, when we start talking about administrator and moderator, these aren't necessarily individual users. They could be, but these could also be roles. A role that a user takes on. You are a moderator. Maybe there's 5 moderators. And that's when you start talking about something called role-based access control, which is a scheme that you use to authorize access to different entities. And this is all talking about authorization so far. So role-based access control is an example where a user has a role. That role gives them certain permissions over certain entities. And that same role can be applied to other users and so on. And again, it gets complicated. There's some interesting schemes where there's reusable policies that you can apply to roles and things of that nature. If you think about AWS IAM or GCP IAM, if you use those cloud services, they're basically implementing a more complex version of this RBAC, this role-based access control authorization scheme. Okay, so this kind of concept, understanding this mess of lines, linking users and roles to actions on entities, is authorization. And when you're implementing an app, you should always be thinking, whenever you have an entity, who is authorized to access it and how am I enforcing that authorization? This is a key element of your application security model. But there's another important part of it as well, which is authentication. And the idea of authentication is to prove that you are who you say you are, basically. So say you're user A. User A has access to edit and delete these posts. I am user A, me, Luke Turner. But how do I prove to the system that I am user A? I don't want just anybody to be able to say, hey, I'm user A, and then they can access my data or edit or delete my posts. That's not right. Somehow the system has to authenticate me as me. And usually the way that this is done is with something like a username and password. Or nowadays there's things like a pass key. There's multi-factor authentication, which is when you have authentication that involves, say, a password, something you know, as well as a phone or an authenticator device, which is something you own. And that's kind of the idea behind multi-factor authentication. Usually is it's something you know combined with something you own. But there's a variety of different options that authentication can be done. Another one is by delegating it to a third-party system using something called SSO, single sign-on, or there's various approaches to that as well. So authentication can get really complicated. Authorization can get really complicated, but both of them can also be quite simple depending on what your app is trying to accomplish. But there's a lot of gotchas involved in both of them as well. In any case, that's kind of the idea between authentication and authorization. Usually the two come as a pair, because if you need to authorize people to access data, you need authentication to prove that they are who they say they are. And conversely, if you're authenticating users to prove that they are who they say they are, usually the only reason you're doing that in the first place is because they need to be authorized to do something. If your data is entirely public, if you don't have the ability to edit or delete anything, this stuff all goes away. There's just viewing. Like, for example, say you have a static blog hosted online, static HTML. Anyone can view those files, and all you can do is view them. there's no other authorization, and there's no authentication that's needed either because of that. So that's my spiel on authentication and authorization. All right. I'm probably going to make that a highlight or something. Now, how does that apply to this particular app? Well, an interesting thing about the way this app was originally designed is we have this public server, which public in this case means that there is no authentication, there is no authorization. Anybody is able to perform these actions. So anybody is able to query for the tracking image. Anybody is able to query for the tracking script. Anybody is able to do these AJAX requests to update the database, to create new events. And normally you don't want to allow anybody to update your database, but it's basically a necessity of the way an analytics application that runs on the client side works. The client side tracker script is unauthenticated because any user is just able to basically copy whatever is in that HTML and then replicate it. There's no way to authenticate that, practically speaking. So we just leave it unauthenticated. Last session, we did add kind of a key, which adds sort of like a best effort semi-password, but it's not really a password because, again, anyone can just look at that HTML on that page, copy, paste it, and use that, basically impersonating the tracking script. But we also have this protected side, which is the dashboard, right? And let's actually launch the app here. Oops. And so if we look at the main bun run dev command here, which is basically the main analytics service that's running, it's exposing two ports, port 3000 and port 3001. Port 3000 is the public port, right? So this is the port that anybody can access, and there's no authentication. Port 3001 is the private port. Now, if I go to localhost 3001 here, we got to give it a minute to build the HTML bundle here. So this just loaded this page right away. It didn't prompt me for a username and password, and that's not because I'm logged in already on this browser or something like that. We don't have any authentication, and therefore we don't have any authorization either in this dashboard. So why is that? It's because there was this idea, if we go back to the architecture again, that this is protected by networking rules. So this server hosted on this port is exposed to the public. For example, if I'm hosting this on fly.io, I can set up a public port access to this port. And then it'll have a DNS name. It'll be something that people can just browse to from the public internet. Meanwhile, this other port will only be accessible within my Fly private network, pardon me. And so to access it, I would need to use like the fly proxy command on my computer, or I would need to use another service that's actually running in my Fly private network to communicate with it. You could do a similar thing without Fly using something like a VPN. There are services where you have like a VPN that's used as your authentication layer to protect a service that otherwise is not authenticated. Usually that's not a very good pattern though. And in this case as well, it's not a very good pattern. It's something that we did basically because of the simplicity of it. But it has some annoying aspects, and that's why I want to get rid of it. In particular, I don't want to have to run Fly proxy every time I want to communicate with this app or connect to a VPN or something. I want to be able to load it up on my phone, go to a public website, log in, and see my data. Or I want to be able to go to any public computer that's connected to the internet, log in and see my data, not have to have my Fly account connected on the computer or whatever. So we're going to do that. That's what we're going to do today. We'll see how far we get. So let's talk about that a little bit. In this app, it's basically what I call a single user application. I don't know if there's a more technical term for it or not, but there's going to be one user that logs in, equivalent to kind of the administrator role here. It's going to be one user that has access to all of the data. Now, you still need authentication because that data is not public. And you still need authorization because whenever you're trying to read some data, you need to ensure that the user is logged in. But it doesn't get more complicated than that. So the authorization rules here are very simple. We don't have to think about, well, does your user have access to see this piece of data? It's like the user will always have access to see every piece of data. But we need to be able to authenticate the user, and then we need to do an authorization check to make sure that there is a user that's logged in on every API request. So that's basically the gist of what we need to accomplish. So how do we do that, technically speaking? Well, usually, if you're building an app, you're going to want to use a library. An example is Better Auth to do authentication and authorization. And also, one thing I should note, usually these are two separate concerns, and typically you have separate libraries for them. So Better Auth here, it calls itself an authentication framework because that's what it is. It allows users to prove they are who they say they are, either with a password or using, say, their GitHub account or something like that. What it doesn't do is, given that user, allow you to make assertions about what data that user has access to. For that, you need a separate library. And there are some libraries that actually do that. Usually they're have built-in assumptions about how your application works. Like there's a lot of coupling between authorization and the way your application works. So there's some super generic authorization libraries that are like really powerful, but then they take a lot of setup. And there's other ones where it's like they're very opinionated and you basically have to structure your application to work with them almost from the beginning. In our case, we don't need to worry about authorization really. And authentication, I'm also not going to use a library for that either. We're going to implement authentication ourselves using the built-in primitives that come with bun, is what I'm hoping to do. And that's not something I've actually done before, but I feel like it shouldn't be too complicated, and we'll see how that goes. And part of the reason for that is like, so take this library here. It's got all these features that we don't need. We don't need user management. There's only one user. We don't need email login because there's no need to verify that the user has a valid email address at all. We're not sending them any emails yet. Once we add email sending, if we do, maybe that will change. We don't need multiple users to be able to log in. Maybe I said that already. And so we just want to keep it simple. Okay, so what are we actually going to do then? Well, kind of what I'm thinking is, let's go to our config here, and we're going to have a environment variable for the user's password, the default initial password that's used to log in when you first create the app. And so let's call this admin. We'll have a user one, which will just be admin. And we could do like process.n.admin user to allow the user to change it. And then we'll do the same thing for the password. And really for the password, I might do just kind of like a random value here, similar to how I've done in the past. Or if we do like OpenSSL rand hex, or let's do base 64 16, and we get this random string, and we could just put this in here. This will just make it a little bit harder for that to be guessed. But part of the idea here is this password, it's stored in plain text in the code base. This is not a secure password. So the first time the user logs in, we're going to need to have them change it to something that only they know, and that is going to be stored in the database with a hash. It's going to be secure in that regard. But for now, we're just adding these here. Okay. And then we're going to need, and it doesn't really matter what order we do this stuff in, but we're going to need a user table in the database is kind of what I'm thinking here. So let's go ahead and make a new folder. We're just going to call this auth, actually. And then I'm going to make a new file in here called user. And let's kind of look at one of these models. I'm actually just going to sort of copy this and put it over here. And I'm going to copy this too and put it over here. And then we're going to adjust this for our use case. Okay, so first of all, we've got our table name. And these imports are going to be a mess, but we'll clean those up. Our table name here is just going to be users. And we're going to have a table of users, even though there's only going to be one user in it, the admin user. Because what else would you do? You know, there's maybe other ways to model it, but this is just the way that makes the most sense. And in theory, if we do want to add multiple users in the future, this is going to give us a pathway to do that without breaking database changes. Then we're going to define our user schema. So there's an ID, there's a username, and this actually seems pretty reasonable for the username, fine. And then there's going to be a password. And for now, that's going to be it. And we'll just make this a z.string.min1, why not? And again, this password is not going to be stored in plain text in the database. That's a big no-no when you're implementing authorization or authentication, I should say. Kind of the reason behind that is if somebody gains access to your database or is otherwise able to read that password, then they're able to log in as that user. Whereas if you use a hashing algorithm, which I'm not going to go into too much detail there, but a hashing algorithm is basically like I forget what you call it, like a single directional function or something. It's a function that transforms a value in a way that's easy to replicate, but not easy to undo. So you can go from a password to the hash of the password, but you can't go from the hash of the password back to the password. And there's a lot of depth here and a lot of best practices stuff that I'll get into a little more when we actually implement that part. But for now, just know that we're not going to store the plain text of the hash or the password in the database. And for that reason, you know, just to be extra clear, let's call this field password hash. Okay, so get rid of, or let's keep this, I guess. We'll call this user. And this will be a type of user schema. And then we'll call this user ID is user ID. Okay. And we're just going to have a function called getAdminUser. And it's going to return a single user. And select star from table name where, I guess, ID how would we do this? Let's just get the first one and assume that there's only one for now. Actually, I'm not a huge fan of that either. For now, let's just do something a little weird here. We're going to create a default admin user ID. And kind of the reason I want to do this is because I want them to be able to change the username, but it's going to have the same underlying ID. So we're going to define basically a global const admin user ID, and that is going to be a UUID. So to get that, we could just open a bun REPL here. I think you can do this. What the heck? That's not what I want. Let's just use node. The bun REPL can be kind of weird. It dropped me down into the matrix there or something. Okay, so if we do like require crypto.random UUID, we get one. You can also get these from websites and stuff like that if you just Google it. There's UUID generators, but might as well use the tools we have, right? Okay, so we've got our admin user ID, and then we could say like where ID equals ID, and then this would be .get ID admin user ID. And we're not mapping anything, we're just doing this. So then, you know, I guess we could do like user schema dot parse like that. Okay. So now the reason we're doing that user schema dot parse, it's been a while since we've worked on the database in this app. So just to kind of explain that again, kind of the idea there is we're getting this data back from SQLite and it has an object structure, but we haven't validated that object structure at the application layer. So if somehow some invalid data got into our database, we can't necessarily assert that it has this type structure. So we run it through this user schema.parse, which is going to verify that it has the right type structure. And it's also going to coerce the type to be the actual type of this user object. So the TypeScript understands and is happy with that. Okay. Let's get rid of this other stuff. We don't really need any of that for the moment. And then we can get rid of all this, I guess. And we do want this though. It would be like create users table. And this would be create table if not exists users. You know, this matches the table name up here. I guess you could do like, maybe I should actually do it like this. And then, you know, we've got an ID, text primary key, a username, text, and a password hash. And let's see, I'm trying to remember what pattern did I do for multi-word fields in the other tables? Yeah, so I actually did an underscore pattern for those. It's not conventional for JavaScript, but it is conventional for SQL, and we kind of need to bridge that gap. Or just use the SQL convention in JavaScript, which is what we're doing. Okay. So now this is going to create the users table. We need to actually call this. As I recall, that's in DB. Yeah, create users table. This is sort of like our migration equivalent. Not really a migration, but it's like setting up the database. And well, let's just leave it at that for now. Okay. So one other thing we're going to need here, and I'm just going to do this now, is we also need sessions. And so what is a session? So think about when you log into a site with your browser. You enter your username and password, you get logged in, and then you can click around and do stuff in the app for a certain amount of time, and you don't actually need to keep logging in every time you do something, do you? That's because when you logged in on the server, a session was created for you. And as long as your browser has the token for that session, that basically acts as a password that the browser is using to authenticate itself to that session. And then that session is associated with your user. So it's basically authenticating as your user using this session token. So you don't need to keep re-entering your password. And we're going to be implementing that here as well. So let's actually just copy all of this again. And this one, table name sessions and session schema. And here we'll have an ID, we'll have an associated user, which is also going to be a UUID. And we will also have an expiration time. And I'll get to what that is later, but for now, we're just going to add it as a column. Let's call it expires. And this will be a what? Number? I guess. Not sure. We'll figure that out. It's a date, you know, it's a timestamp, but exactly how that's represented, I'm not sure. It's what's going to be the best way. Okay, so we've got session, type session, then we type session ID, and session schema, and that should be session. Okay, then that goes away. So we're going to have a thing get session by token, which actually reminds me of another field which we're going to want to put in here, which is probably, we'll have a field called token. And this is going to be basically the password that's used for this session. And we'll have this token be just z.string for now. I don't know what exactly that's actually going to be. Maybe tokens should be hashed too. I'm not totally sure if that's considered the best practice or not. There's kind of less importance to hashing them because they have that expiration. So even if somebody in your database like finds a token, chances are it's going to be expired, but there is still the possibility that they're going to find the token for a valid session and be able to use that to authenticate. So maybe that should be hashed too, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. This will be session, and this is going to accept token. And we're just going to do session schema.parse where token equals token. And that'll be token. Okay. And then create sessions table. And, you know, we've got our ID, we've got user ID, we've got token, and we've got expires. And let's look at how we did date times maybe in some other places. I think our events have a date time, right? Like start time, it's a date time. And how do we represent that in JavaScript? If we look at our schema, start time is a number. Okay, that is right. Okay, so expires, datetime. And is there, can you do a unique thing in SQLite? SQLite unique. I mean, it seems like yes. Let's just put that on there then. So the idea here is this token should be unique. There should never be two sessions with the same token. Our application will make sure of that, but we can also put this constraint at the database level as well. Okay. Okay, so we've got some stuff. We still have a lot of stuff to add though. But let's kind of think a little bit more about the front end as well. I'm just kind of thinking in my head, I guess where else would I be doing it? So in our app, we have one page. Basically, we've gotten away with it so far with just having a single page, a single React root, if I recall, this app. And if we go into app, it just has this homepage. You know, there's no URL-based routing or anything like that. So we will eventually need to adjust that. But in the meantime, we might just wrap this with an authorization thing. Let's put it out here, an authorization context provider thingy, right? So we'll call it auth provider, whatever. Not sure exactly what we want to call this thing, but that's fine. And then we need to implement our auth provider. So let's go in, I guess we would put this in components. I'm kind of tempted to put it in auth, but I don't think that makes sense. And we'll make a new thing here called auth provider.tsx. And we'll export const auth provider. And for now, it's not going to do anything. And how do we type this again? Like that. Oh, okay. So we would do React dot props with children, right? So now we assert that auth provider is a React functional component that accepts a children property here. And we're using this kind of helper function to avoid having to figure out what the type of children would be, which although we can see it right here, so we could also just write it ourselves that way. But currently this doesn't do anything, right? And so if I save this, and in the app here, we need to import this auth provider and save that. We should be able to reload this and see that nothing happens. You know, it's just the app, right? But kind of what we want to do now is have something in here that's going to check whether we're authenticated or not. And if we're not, it's going to redirect us to a login page. One sec. Person to ban in my chat. Okay. Okay, so what's the best way to do this? I mean, there's so much stuff that we're going to have to write. It's kind of like you just have to start somewhere. Let's do const user equals use session. Let's call it use session. And maybe we'll actually assume that the user is a property that's returned by this hook, use session. Maybe we'll call it session. Why not? Okay, so what is this use session hook? Now this is something we have to implement, right? And I guess I'll put it in hooks. I kind of wish I had a like a folder for hooks, because this file's kind of got a lot of unrelated stuff in it. So let's actually do that. I'm just going to make a new folder, call it hooks. We can move the other hooks into it at some point. But in the meantime, this is where I'm going to add new ones. We're going to make one called use session.ts. Okay. Oops. And so this is going to look up the session, if there is one, and return it. I'm just kind of thinking about how we want to do this. I'm not really sure what the best way is. I'm not really sure. Let's just try something here and see how it feels. So first of all, the session itself is going to be probably in a cookie. Right? Probably. When you're thinking about these single page applications, it's like a little more complicated actually than if this was a regular old multi-page JavaScript application. But we can still do it that way. So how do we access our cookies? This is something I don't remember. Is this, I know that. I want to read them from JavaScript. Document.cookie. Yeah, not sure if this is going to end up being the best approach, but let's give it a shot. So const cookies equals document.cookie. And I guess we can put this in a use effect. Right, let's import that. And then ultimately, we're just going to stub this out, but the idea is this is going to return something like this, where a session is an object. And then if we go back to our auth provider component, let's import this. And we would say something like if not session, return you must log in. And normally this would be a login page and we'll implement that, but we've got to build that. So this is just a placeholder for now. But the idea is that if there is no session, you get sent to the login page. Otherwise, you get sent to this children. And it's going to get more complicated. So don't you worry about that. Okay, let's take a look at our console here. So there are no cookies, which makes sense, right? Now, let's implement something a little more interesting here. I'm going to make a new component called login page, logic page. That must be some muscle memory. Just type logic. Okay, and we're going to export const login page react.fc equals and this will return for now, let's just do like a div. And then within the div, we'll have a button like a shad cn UI button that's just like login, right? And so this is going to make a call to the server. So we'll have a new file here. Maybe we'll call this like use I kind of actually want to put it in the use session one. Does that make sense? We'll see if that makes sense. So I want this to also return a login function. Let's just do it like that. And we'll do const login equals use memo, or use callback, I mean. And what is this callback going to do? So we're going to I think, well, I don't know. Let's see. So we're going to want to send theoretically the username and the hashed password to a login URL on the server, right? So let's do that. And I don't know if we need the response, but let's just make this async and assume that maybe we are going to want to. So const response equals await fetch. And here the URL is going to be the URL of the server. How did we do that over here, I wonder? If we look at these other hooks, it's just like this slash. We just use a absolute path segment that doesn't specify the full URL. And this could be like slash auth slash login. And we would give it a body, which could be a JSON thing. Username. And I guess I'll give this username password. So there's going to be a username and there's also going to be a password hash. Right? Also, what are you complaining about? Identifier expected? Oh, it should be a comma. Okay. So what does that password hash mean? And so this is a string and password's also a string. So we need to actually calculate the hash of the password. And I'm not actually sure if you do this usually client side or server side. I feel like it normally happens server side, actually. So let's just not worry about it for the moment. And we can add password hashing in wherever the place that's the best practice for it once we actually get to the point of thinking about that. But for now, we're just kind of connecting the pieces together, right? Yeah. So if we go back to login page here, so this is going to be on click, handle login, and then we're going to define a callback for that. Handle login equals use callback. And this will have login, oops, login user pass, which we haven't defined yet, of course. Const login equals use session, right? And then user and pass are going to be states, state objects here. So user, set user, because we're basically going to be building a form in this page. Use state, empty string, import, pass, set pass, empty string, right? And let's just default this to admin and test. And what is this callback actually going to do? Well, it's going to call login user pass. Simple. Okay. So we've got some wired up stuff here. So what's actually going to happen on the server side now? Not sure. Let's take a look. Let's find our server code. And in our dashboard port structure here, eventually we're going to merge both of these two servers together, but I'm not going to do that quite yet. Just got to, work on one thing at a time here. We're going to have /auth/login. And this will have a post that will return something. What are you complaining about? It doesn't like that it's not returning something, I guess. For now, let's just do return const resp equals new response, return resp. Okay. And then let's see. So we're going to want to parse the body. Do I have kind of a pattern for that down here, I wonder? Not sure. Doesn't really matter. I can just do it like this. So const body equals rec dot. How come I don't have a type on that? What's up with that? It's got a type. And then I do a dot. Now it doesn't have a type. That's weird. Is that why I have had something like this in there before? Just to temporarily get it to like actually give me the type. And then I think I do .json. And then this, oh wait. And so then body is going to have the username and password in it, hopefully. So we could say, but it's typed as any because this is coming from the server or from the client. We don't necessarily know what type it is. It's not type safe to assume anything about it, really. It should probably be unknown type in TypeScript. Unknown is like the type that doesn't have any properties, whereas any is like the type that has all of the properties. So typing this as any in bun is not necessarily the best, but any is more convenient to use. In any case, we're going to return, we're going to just say like if body question mark dot username equals admin and body question mark dot password equals test. Actually, let's invert this. If the username is not admin or the password is not test, then this is the failure case. Kind of a random note about that, by the way. There's something in logic, propositional logic called De Morgan's laws, I believe it's called. And it's basically like if you have A, so if you say like not A and B, like this, not A and B, that's equivalent to not, I guess I'll leave the parentheses, not A or not B. So it's kind of like distributive law, but when you distribute the not, you also have to switch the and to an or vice versa. And so that's what I did here, where instead of saying if not body.username equals admin and body.password equals test, we distributed the not into each of the cases, and then you have to switch the and to an or. So in case you ever thought about that, doesn't really matter, but can make it easier to remember. Because Boolean logic can sometimes be a bit brain bending once you have a bunch of ands and ors in there. Okay, so in this case, we would return response.json, or I guess just new response. New response. Invalid login. status 401 or something. I don't know. I guess it'd be a 4. Let's just do 403, whatever. Okay. But if they are correct, then we're returning this other response. And in this response, we're going to want to set a cookie. And you do that by setting, I believe, a set cookie header. So how do we do that? resp.headers dot append, or what is it? Get set cookie. Oh, that's interesting. I don't really get that. What about append? I think we would use append here. And this would be name set cookie. And the value would be like session equals the session token, which we don't have yet. And then I think you have a semicolon afterwards, something like that. So let's get the session token for now. So we'll do const session equals create session. And we'll need to pass in a user ID here. So first we need to get the user. Const user equals get user. And I'm actually thinking, like I have this get admin user function. I kind of want to just not do that. So let's go back to the user thing here. Let's do get user by username. And here the username would then be unique. Just so that there's not multiples. And then here we would have where username equals username. It's going to take a username and it's going to get username. Simple as that. And then this we don't really need. We might eventually want it though still, but for now we don't need it. All right. So, where were we? If we go back to our server here, so this would be get user by ID or get user by username. And this would be body username. And again, like these password checks, this is not really the way to do it. But it's just kind of like a temporary thing that we've got in here. Okay, let's just think of that as temporary and leave it as is for now. So session. We need another function for creating sessions now. Create a session. And this accepts the username, or the user ID, I mean. Let's use a JavaScript idiom. User ID. And then we'll do insert into table name. ID, user ID, token, expires, values, ID, user ID, token, expires. And I just noticed a typo. Let's fix that. And this would be dot run right? I don't know if it would be .run, .query. Maybe it actually is .get. Because the thing is, I want this to return. Like that. Does that really matter? Let's see how we did that in one of these other ones. I feel like there was a bit of a trick to it, wasn't there? Oh yeah, okay, so it's like this. Let's actually copy this concept here and put that up here. And this is session schema.parse. I mean, yeah. Data. We don't have our data yet though. Const data equals ID, random UUID, user ID, token, to-do, expires, let's say date.now plus 30 minutes in milliseconds. And let's just define this up here. 30 times 60 seconds in a minute times 1,000 milliseconds in a second. Okay. And then these are just imports. So an explanation of that, these create keys for object and create values for object are just taking this valid data and constructing a SQL query string automatically. So we don't have to write out like ID, user ID, token expires a bunch of times. If we add a new field here, this query code doesn't have to change at all. The actual query will change, but the code doesn't have to change. Hello. Delta Nicola, is that how you pronounce that? Welcome to the chat. All right, so that should be good. And again, we need to implement the actual token, but we're just kind of building this up one piece at a time. So we've got our create session here, and this needs the user.id. Okay. And then this would be session.token. Okay, so kind of what I want to see here is if we go over here. Oh yeah, I forgot to update I think it's the auth provider. So this needs to return login page, first of all. And we also need to update use session to only return the session if there actually is a session. For now, let's just return null. Pretend it doesn't exist, stub it out. Okay. So now we've got this login button, and we should see this make a network request, and it should cause a cookie to be set, ? Honestly, I don't know that much about how cookies work. Less than I should anyway. Okay, request with getHead method. Oh, I forgot to set the method in here. That makes sense. So this needs a method post. Okay, let's try again. So we got a 500. Let's look at our logs and see what error there is here. Zod error, invalid input, expected object received null. It's kind of annoying that we don't have like a stack trace for that. Let's just look back at our code here. So we got past this, presumably, because we got to this database stuff where it's using Zod. If we look at get user by username again, oh, right. So this isn't able to find the user because we don't have any users in the database. That makes sense. So let's fix that. Create admin user. And this is just going to be a setup function for now. Because as I said before, this is just a single user application. We're not going to have the ability for users to register. There's just going to be one admin user. And so now we're going to use this admin user ID again. So we're going to maybe I'll actually make just a create user function as well. Which again, I'm going to kind of copy from one of my other things here just for the sake of consistency. So let's do create user. And for now, I'm not even going to export this because it shouldn't be used outside this function or this module. And this data is just user. And it's going to return a user. And this would be user schema and user schema. And import these once again. So just our little create user ORM type function in here, right? And then we can use that in this create admin user function just to do it nice and simply. So we can do create user, create user. And in this case, it'll be ID, admin user ID. Username, admin user, which is a config variable that we have. Password hash. We're not actually hashing this yet. I haven't implemented that yet. So we're just going to do that raw admin password in here. We'll deal with the hashing soon. And this, I guess I'll just use that up here as well for now. Again, this isn't really how you'd want to do it if this was a multi-user application, but like it technically works for now. And then we'll adjust it to be more profoundly correct as we go. So then in the login page, we also want to return the password. And we don't actually have the ability to import this on the client because of this server only declaration. And also, you're just not supposed to. So these default values here, these would be something the user would normally fill in, but we haven't built the form to fill them in yet. Again, we're just kind of building it piece by piece. So we're going to stub out the password here. Okay. So now we need to call that create admin user function on startup or once. So actually, let's do if not get user by username. And this should really be user or null, now that I think about it. And this would be admin user. And let's do it like this. Existing user equals this. if existing user, then just return that. Otherwise, we're going to create the user. And this, we could say returns user. It will never return null. What's up with that? Oh, right. I got to return that. Okay. Excellent. And then this create admin user function, we can actually just call, we could call that in our database setup for now. Like that. And because we do that check, so this is something called making the function idempotent, where if you call it multiple times, it won't change the outcome, if that makes sense. Like you can call it once, it'll create the user. If you call it 3 times or 1,000 times, it's not going to create 1,000 users. It's just going to be the one user. So we can just call it every time the app starts to be safe. And if it needs to create a user, it'll do it. If it doesn't need to create the user, it won't do it, right? That's a valuable property for functions like this. Okay. This has got really messed up down here. What's going on with that? Okay. So with that, I'm trying to think, I don't remember what else we needed to do. Hopefully that is it. Let's see. So if I try logging in, we get another 500. What's it complaining about now? Expected object received null. I mean, it's saying the same thing. Really, this should be like if not user. Let's actually do this a little more properly. And we don't really want to be checking that here. It should password, yes. And let's just update this import there, and then we're going to actually define that import. And again, we're not worried about the hashing quite yet. We'll add that. Username, password. The field is called password hash, though. Okay. So with that, it's basically like if this function returns something, then, and you know, I'm thinking about it, I'm like, actually, so this is part of the problem is that this parse let's, okay, actually, let's, how do we redo again? Control Y. I always get the redo button confused between Windows and OS X because I think they're usually different. I'm actually going to make another function here, which is just get user by ID is the implication. And ID string. And this will do user schema dot parse where ID equals ID. And this is actually what we're going to use down here. So we've got a different function for getting the user based on the username and password, and another one for getting it based on the ID, which is, we know here, just admin user ID. Okay. But the problem is this get user function is supposed to be able to potentially return null, and the same thing with this one. But this user schema dot parse is asserting that we have an object. So really, we kind of need to do like user schema dot, is there like a dot or? I feel like dot or dot, what if we did dot nullable. And we would kind of want to do the same thing up here. So we can allow this to return potentially null without throwing an exception. Let's see what happens now. Click login. So now we get another error, different error. No such table sessions. Really? Did I forget to, oh yeah, I forgot to do the thing for that. Okay, so we would do create sessions table in here as well. Okay, and I think, let's just reload this to be sure. Oh, now it's complaining about that. What are you complaining about here? There shouldn't be a comma at the end. Right. Okay. SQL does not allow trailing commas the way JavaScript does. So now I click login, I got a 200, that's great. So the response here should be kind of like a nothing response, but there should be a response header that's set cookie, and it's setting the session to to-do, which, as you'll recall, is when we call create session, that's what the session token is set to. Now, normally this would be a random value, a non-guessable, sufficiently random value that is associated with the session. And I mean, I guess for now, let's just put a UUID in there. Or I mean, you know, we could do like random bytes. And then we could do like 32. And then we could do like, so this random bytes function returns a buffer. And then we could do like toString base 64. The problem is I don't know if base 64 is going to have any weird characters in there. What is base 64 URL? I don't know. Let's just do hex for now, though. So now the token is going to be a 32-byte random hex value. So let's try that again here. If we click login, it'll do set cookie, and now it's this random value. And this is basically our password now for the browser to use. So fine, that's fine. So I think now if I were to refresh this page, like if I look at localhost here, the request headers don't have any cookies. I think if I were to refresh the page and look at localhost, does the request header now like have a cookie in there? Doesn't look like it. Cookies? Show filtered out request cookies? I don't know what that means. Why is it filtered out? Its path was not an exact match for, or a superdirectory of the request's URL's path. So that's okay. Maybe cookies are not the best approach here for a single page app. We could, so kind of what that's saying is like this, you would actually need to basically post to this route, not /auth, but to just the root / and set the cookie there, and then it wouldn't be filtered out. Now, it doesn't necessarily need to be like that, but let's not use a cookie here. Let's just set that aside for now and just return it and store it in our state and send it manually in our JavaScript. It might actually be simpler. So let's go back to our thing here. Instead of returning this as a cookie, we're going to just return it in the response. So we're going to do return new, or let's do return response.json session, and we will put in the session token. or let's call it token, and it will be session.token. Okay, get rid of this. Okay, so now in our use session hook, this response, we're going to say like const token equals response dot JSON. And I think we need to await that, right? Yeah. Await response dot JSON dot token. And that's going to be a string. Okay. And let's say string or undefined. And then we could say something like if token session set session token, like that. So what is a set session? This is something we need in our hook here, up here. So let's put it at the top. Session set session. This is basically what's going to keep track of our session token for us instead of using a cookie. Use state null. And this is going to be either null. Let's start with the positive state, token string, or null. And we got to import this. Okay. This bit we don't need anymore. And now this needs set session as a dependency. And also that's it, I guess. Okay. So here session is actually just going to be session now, like that. Cool. So we try to log in. If we successfully log in, then we set this session token. Now this isn't, to be clear, this isn't authentication. This is all happening on the client side. We're tracking the session token so that we can send the session token to the server. The actual authentication is going to have to happen on the server side because the user is going to be able to read this token. They're going to be able to set it to whatever they want, potentially. We can't be like, if you don't have the token, you know, don't make the request and call that security. Like that doesn't count as security. It has to be something on the server side, and we just haven't gotten to that yet. But for now, this is kind of where we're at. Okay, so good. So let's try this now. Let's try it from scratch. So we need to log in. You click the login button. And I mean, it's got the cookie in there because this is the same path. But anyway, we don't need to worry about the cookie. In fact, why not? Let's clear that cookie. Clear. Just so we don't confuse ourselves or confuse our code. So click login. And fine, it returned a token. Now, what should happen then is this auth provider should be like, oh, hey, now we have a session and it should return children. So I'm wondering why that's not happening. Because in theory, it's like we're updating this session state of this hook in this callback. We're calling this. I don't think that has to happen in an effect. Does that have to happen in a use effect? I'm not sure. But I didn't think so. Let's see, if we look at console here, so there's session null. If we click login, we don't get like the new session. So let's see. What would happen if we replaced it with use effect? Does that seem like it makes sense? That doesn't make sense to me, but I'm just going to try it. And really, this is going to be like all of this. And let's just see if this does a thing. No, let's not. Let's not. Okay, so what's going on here? So here we are getting our session. I feel like I'm probably just missing something dumb here. Use callback, use state. Let's make sure that we're actually setting the session. Just in case that's a problem. Okay, we are setting the session. Just thinking here. So, I mean, in my head, I'm thinking a couple things. I'm thinking, I feel like this should work, and I don't exactly understand why it doesn't work. But I'm also thinking that maybe we should actually use our TanStack query library to do this instead, using the same pattern that we do for other data loading. Does that make sense? Like if we look over here, we kind of use this pattern for loading data. And maybe that makes more sense. Does that make more sense? Not sure. Let's try it. So if we were going to do that, be something like this. Get rid of this bit. Don't need that. Get rid of this bit. Don't need that. And this use query would be imported from there, right? Yeah. And this would just be session. The query key here is really just session. And the query function would theoretically be this callback here, kind of a thing. The problem is it's not really like that though. It would be more like const data equals use query. And there's almost like query function is just like return session. This feels weird. I don't know. And then this would be one of these. Doesn't this seem super weird? But I'm kind of curious if this is actually going to do it or not. It's definitely not going to do it. This is not right. I mean, in theory down here, you would need to do like, you know, const query client use query client. And then you would do query client dot invalidate queries session. Right? What are you complaining about? Oh, it would be like query key session. And then if we did want it to work this way, the one other thing we would need to do is put this underneath the query client provider in our app tree here. Really weird, feels really weird, but let's just see. So we, what? So it did do a thing that time. It was just like slow about it. So if I click login, oh, so it doesn't do it the first time, but when I click it the second time, then it does it. Okay, that's lovely. That's probably a ordering issue with the set session business. Curious, if I just return session here and click it twice, does that... The heck? I don't know what that's trying to tell me, really. Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I feel like the query client, like this stuff, that's not really the right way to do it. So I don't want to do it that way. But I wish I could understand why this other way is not working. So let's just do something where we do like use effect. There we go. And this will have a thing here. And here we will do set session token foobar set session. And I'm curious if this is gonna, I'm just trying to figure out where in the process it's like breaking down. Okay, so that did update it. So I think there is like a use, like calling set session inside the use callback, I guess, doesn't work for some reason, maybe. I don't remember how that, why that is a thing though. But then how would you actually trigger this use effect though it becomes the problem? I guess let's just, let's copy, yeah. I guess let's go look back at the React docs and see if we can figure out how to do what we're trying to do. So really what I want to use is use callback. I want to update state from a memoized callback. I mean, it looks like it works. It's acting like it should work, right? Every reactive value must be declared as a dependency of your effect. Right. I mean, right. So let's just confirm something here. If we do session, we should be able to console.log session has updated. And we're just kind of trying to work through finding the weird issue. What is the weird issue here? Oh, what is this? What just happened? Refresh. Yes. So session is updated. These are all being logged twice because of the React dev mode thing, where it calls all hooks twice. So session, setting session, and session has updated. So that is actually working. So then the problem is in this auth provider, it's not re-rendering. Right? Oh, well, one actually weird thing I just thought of. We kind of need to use well, do we? Let's just see. If not session, return login page. Otherwise, return children. I mean, I feel like that's the way it should work. So now if I click login, we get setting session, we get session has updated, but this session here is not getting logged, which means this use session, this value is not getting updated. Maybe this needs to be inside a use memo. Is that a thing? Const data equals use memo? Is that like something? And then this would be session login. Use memo session. Let's make some types for these, I guess. So we're going to have interface session, token string, and I could do export that. And then I could do type maybe session equals session or no. So this would be a maybe session. And this would return a maybe session. What is it? Yeah, okay. Let's just finish that up. So session, maybe session, login, whatever type this is. that. Right? So what is this complaining about now? Oh, so yeah, right. Use memo has to take a function, of course. I'm pretty sure it has to take a function. Let's fix that. So this would be like this. And really we could do it like this. And just wrap these in parentheses. Okay, something like that. I think. So does that fix it? No. No, why would it fix it? I mean, so if that doesn't fix it though, then like what is the problem? What am I missing here? Session. I feel like I must be missing something real dumb. Oh dear. So let's undo the use memo business. I don't think that really helps. Theoretically, use memo only makes stuff computed less frequently. It's not gonna recompute it more frequently. Let's restart the server just to get it a clean slate here. And then we kind of have to wait for it to build. Okay. Yeah. Why is that a thing? So let's look at another hook here and maybe I can wrap my brain around the problem. What's a good one to look at? Like the app state one, maybe? I mean, for this, we're using a context. I don't think I need to use an actual context for this provider, do I? Let's try something else here. If I do something at home where I do like const session equals use session, and then use effect, let's just copy from here. Session in home. Thing is, the home's not even really going to be rendered. Maybe I have to do something weird here. Do I have to do something weird here like this? Session, question mark, children, otherwise login page. That shouldn't really fix it either though, because this use effect is not even getting called. Yeah, that doesn't really fix it either. Okay. Hmm. Hmm. So, I mean, theoretically, the set function should update this. It should trigger a re-render of the. What? Why is this? Why doesn't this work, man? Let me try something here. If I copy this all into my auth provider hook instead of whatever I had there, and then instead of returning login page, we would, have all this stuff in there as well, like this. Again, just trying to figure out what I'm doing that's dumb and wrong here, because there's something. Then this would be like if not session return that, right? So what is this going to do? Now the session state is right here in the component. It's not abstracted away into another function. Which shouldn't matter. I feel like it shouldn't matter because that's like just a composable hook, right? But okay, so that, what does that mean? Cannot update a component unknown while rendering a different component unknown. It did do the thing this time. That's really bizarre. What am I missing here? So let me try something else here, actually. If I comment all of this out, and what if I return session set session here? So now this use session hook is just using that use state thing, right? And then I do use session here. Does that Still work? Yes, that does work. I should be able to get rid of this use effect now too, because if we can see it working, that's all we really need. So what if I take this login and I put that in here? The way it was. Which I guess I could just uncomment the thing above it, but whatever. So what if we do that? And then we get rid of that login, and this becomes session and login. Does that work? That does work. That's interesting. So the hook works, basically, kind of as we expected, which is what you would expect. Oh, okay. I think I just realized what the problem is. As expected, it's something dumb, but it's also confusing. So I kind of can forgive myself for this one. But so in this login page, we're doing use session here, right? And that's calling use state. And in the auth provider, we're also doing use session. That's also calling use state. That's two separate calls to use state. So we actually have two separate session states here. And it's not being shared between the components. And that's why even when we update the session state in the login page component, it's not being updated in the other component. That's also why now that we've combined those two components into one, it does work. But we don't want those components to be combined into one. That's annoying. So really what we need is an actual context provider for this, I guess. So what does that look like? What does it look like? So let's look at our our app here. So like, what about this app state context? Where does this come from? Oh, it comes from right here. Okay. Let's make a new provider. I mean, we could put the session into the app state. Now that I think about it. Is there a good reason not to do that? I can't think of one. So let's just do that. Let's do session is maybe session. And that, we're going to pull in from this other hook. And I don't know, we'll have to see if we even still want a hook for this or exactly how this is going to work now, because I'm kind of rethinking this a little bit. But okay, so then session defaults to null, right? So then the auth provider has to go underneath the app state provider, which is fine. And I'm starting to think that calling this a provider maybe is not the right thing to call it. Let's call this something else. Let's just call it auth wrapper. I don't know. Yeah. And oh yeah, that stuff goes away. We'll need to clean this function up. But for now, let's fix this. So this is auth wrapper. And so now the auth wrapper is actually going to call use session. We can still do this thing with use session, but instead of storing this as state here, we're going to pull it from the app state. How does that even work? Not sure. Let's take a look back at the app here. So we've got use app state. I guess we would use that. Const app state equals use app state. So what is this going to be? It's an immer hook. So I think this has like a state and then like a set app state. Right? Yeah. So then down here we would do set app state. And the way these immer hooks work is we get a draft instance of the state, draft. And then we actually can do mutable operation on that. So we would do something like this. Draft dot session equals that. And then this would be set app state. I don't know if we need to include that in here or not, but we will. And then this would be just return app state dot session. Or session equals app state dot session. Right? So now, if we look at this auth wrapper, let's get rid of this stuff. This is going to go back to return login page. This goes away. The login page should be able to stay the same. Let's try it again. So now if I click login, it works. Thank God. Amazing. Okay. So what time are we at here? We got more time. All right, that's good. Let's actually implement the rest of this page too, just so we can get rid of these junky business here. So we would have like an input value equals user on change. Handle user change. And then we'd have another one for password. Handle pass change. And handle user change is a callback that we'll just do set user. And like if we look at the type of this callback here, it's HTML input element. So this would be like change event HTML input element. Oh, put that in the wrong place though. That's what would go here. And then this would be e.target.value. And we would do the same thing for handle pass change. Do these really need to be callbacks? Arguably not. Some people say that doing callbacks this way is kind of wasteful. Or not wasteful, but it's just pointless. But whatever, we're going to do it. And then we kind of want to make a little form here. So don't really remember how to do that. It's something like this. And we don't, I don't know. We could make it like this whole formic or whatever this is, form business, use form. Probably should do that. Okay, let's do that. I always find this just a little bit like overly complicated to figure out. So use form, and it's going to be username, string, password, string, and values, username, empty string, password, empty string, right? Let's actually look at the docs. Shad cn form. Oh, snap. You can pick your framework. I mean, we're already using React hook form. I would rather use TanStack form, but we're already using this. So let's just use this. Sorry, one sec. Okay. So, I guess we need our form schema. Simple enough. So we would have a login schema, and that could just be const login schema equals z from zod before dot object. Does this support zod before? where does this come from? Yeah. Okay. So username, z.string, password, z.string. Okay. Zod resolver, just got to import that. We're doing this business here. Oh, I like that. Let's do that. Z.infer. Instead of writing the types ourselves, type of login schema. And then, we need our onSubmit function. That's going to be this. Handle login. Let's rename it for consistency. OnSubmit. I don't think we need either of those anymore. So then it's interesting. This is like this. It's just like a legit form. It's like, it's not a custom form component. It's like a HTML form. Something about that feels weird in a world where everything defines a custom component. But then within that, we would have this type of stuff. So let's actually look at our own example of site form here. See, this has what is this form then? This is like a UI form. So needlessly complicated feeling sometimes. Okay. And then there's these form fields, which are going to be like this. And they would be underneath here. Form field, control, form.control, name, username. And these all need to be imported. So UI form, and then we could do add all missing imports, and it should pull them all in from UI form. Great. I guess let's get rid of this. Okay, so then username. We would have another one of these for the password. Oh, and that would be username. Password. Password. And really this input type needs to be password. Right? That's a thing. Okay, so let's see what this looks like now. Go back over here, refresh. It did oh, the app state, it's saving it in our stuff. It's saving it on a local storage, which, you know, it's not terrible, but is that a problem to have the session saved in our local storage? I feel like that's actually kind of what we want. I don't think there's like security concerns with that, but it is a bit annoying for testing because we have to delete that and then we get taken back here. Okay. Oh, and then I need a submit button, right? Of course. Okay. Button type submit, right? That's the thing. Oh, but it still needs text. Login. And no, it's not the prettiest form, but you know, we can, I mean, we could do something here where we added like, oh, I guess you can't do it there. We could do it up here. Div. Good old div. Class name. And it could be like max w xl and m x auto. So it's kind of centered like that. And then because these form fields have padding, we kind of need that padding down here too, or it's not aligned. And so then we, you know, we kind of have a thing going here. And maybe we would just do like my or mx4 there. And then this might, I kind of want to actually center it. Can I, is there like a, just like a weird center? Thing? Probably not. I probably have to wrap it in a flex box or wrap this, make this whole form a flex box. Do we want to do that? Maybe. Well, actually, let's not center it anyway. Let's just leave it as it is for now. Okay. So then I think it's like pre-filled this out from a different app. So this would be admin. And then this, let's just do test here. And then if I do login, so that worked. And it didn't actually send the username and password that I put in because it's using these, right? Right, it should be using something else. Which is what? On submit data z.infer type of. Data z.infer type of login schema. And then it just has login as a dependency, and it should have data dot username, data dot password. Okay. So now I got to delete my state again over here. Delete, refresh, log in, and it doesn't work because we don't have the right password. Also, it doesn't even have the password in there. Oh, I've forgot to update this. That's why that's a thing. But even with that, if I do login, the password ASDF, that's not the right password, so it's not returning a user. And because it's not returning a user, we just get this error message. And really, we should be surfacing that somehow. I don't really want client-side validation. I mean, that's fine, but we need server-side validation for this as well. Next to the field using field error. So like, I mean, we could just, is that not already done for me in here? I feel like that is, right? Like if I say z.string.max1 or .min1, and the same thing here, then if I leave that empty, yeah, we get an error. Okay. So we do have this error stuff, but then how do we get the error from the server side, oops, to not, to propagate to be visible? Because right now it's like there's an error and it's just silently doing its, like doing nothing, basically, right? And we want it to do something. Now, maybe the simplest way to do this is going to be with like a toast. I think we have a toast situation, right? Do we not? Maybe not. I mean, we could install it. So what happens if this doesn't have, this login thing doesn't have, so like we have like if token, blah, blah, blah. There really should kind of be an else, I feel like. Throw new error. Invalid login, or could not log in or something. Just something simple for now. And then when we actually call that in this hook, we can basically do a try login, and we can do a catch E, and then in here we can handle that error somehow, right? And maybe the best way to do that is like, I'm not sure. What if I just do this? I wonder if this, if a React hook form thing is going to like do it for me. I can just leave these values in there, I guess. That's fine. Doesn't really matter. Click login. No, we just get the error. What? Invalid. Oh, so is it expecting a message? Is it actually doing something, but then it doesn't like this because it's not a message? Message. Does this even make sense? I don't know if that makes sense. Where is this? Invalid login is not valid JSON. Oh, that's up here. Oh, I see. Okay, so really this should be all in a try itself. Doesn't really matter that much though. Let's do it though. Catch E, throw new error, could not log in. Then this all goes up here. And we would say something like, if not token, throw new error, could not log in. And it's a little redundant with the thing below it, but this works fine. Get rid of that. Get rid of that. So that's some interesting. VS Code updated not too long ago and like changed some stuff that's throwing me a little bit. Sometimes the way things are highlighted. But anyway. Like that. I feel like that's new. Anyway, this is fine. So in theory now though, it's like try this, catch, throw new error, could not log in. If I click this, we get our error, could not log in. Now, that's fine. And really, this all should go in there too. Let's put this all in there. So then in the login page, we need to catch and handle that. Async. What if, I'm curious, what if we did that? Just curious to see. No, it's okay. It still doesn't like it. So we would really do like try, await login, catch, E, somehow set the error state on the form. React hook form server side validation. Why is this advanced? No, not accessibility. Set error. This is what I want. Yeah, so and where does this come from? I guess it's on the use form thing, so it'd be like form dot set error. Yeah. This one. Root, if we can do that, if that's a thing. And then error, what is error option? Type custom, type custom, and then message e.message. No, e.message. Oh, that didn't work. Okay, so let's see if that kind of lets the user know. So if I click login, I mean, it It didn't. We're not getting our unhandled exception. It is calling that. I might need this in here. Not sure. Doesn't help. I don't know if root will work. What if I do this as password? I think we might not have a place to actually show the root error. Yeah, okay. That's the thing. This is okay. You know, that's fine. It's technically could be the username that's the problem, not the password, right? But let's just leave it like this for now. There's some feedback for the user. We can refine it later. And we're kind of getting to a decent point here to wrap up. You know, we still are definitely not anywhere near done implementing authentication. I knew it would be complicated though. It's kind of fun doing it myself instead of using a library though. But also, yeah, I spent a long time trying to debug that state issue. At least I understand the problem though. I feel better about that. Okay. So let's start committing some of this stuff, I guess. So we've got our admin user and password. We've got our DB stuff. We've got our session file. And I'm just kind of looking through these as I go to see, like, is there something that we need to keep track of remembering about? And then let's see, let's call it like WIP user authentication. To do. Hashing of password and maybe token, session token. We're just leaving some notes for ourselves for next time. Server side session checking and expiration logic. We've implemented this, we've created this expires field, but we're not actually doing anything with it. Right, let's just add that. Let's say admin user password change on initial login is something we need to. This part seems fine. This part seems fine. I guess we don't need that login. We just kind of clearing out some of the testing stuff that we added and don't actually need. Speaking of which, did we add anything weird here? No. Okay. Okay. In the home, this is something we don't need. We just added that for debugging purposes. Get rid of that. Login page component. I mean, this is actually fairly done at this point. Use session. Also fairly done. And then here, we're adding these API routes. So again, this is kind of where we would maybe want to implement the hashing, or maybe it's hashed on the client side. I feel like it, I mean, the advantage of hashing it on the client side is you don't have to send it over the wire, so to speak, in your HTTP request as a raw password. But that doesn't really matter because sending the password hash over the wire is the same because the password hash is what the server actually needs. So the only real problem with hashing it on the client would be if your hashing algorithm, you have to write it in a way that it runs in both the client and the server. Whereas hashing it server side is probably the way to go. You probably just send over the password and that's like fine. Because presumably you're using HTTPS and then you hash it on the server side. So it would actually be in this get user by username and password function that we would be implementing the hashing probably. But, you know, we could have like additional routes, log out, get session. Okay, so that I think is pretty much what we want to see. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. I'm also going to, I'm not going to commit, wait, what's the change here? What did I change? Can I see? Does it show me? Oh, that was like I added these, yeah. But we didn't actually do that anyway. So let's just discard that. That's from last time. The change here, we added this note about the RBAC stuff, or, you know, authorization and authentication, that RBAC example, let's get rid of that. And then here I will add, I will say this is WIP C commit for next steps. Okay, so with that, let's quit here and let's commit our work in progress commit, or I mean, push it. It's kind of a question, do you want to push a work in progress commit or not? If I'm collaborating with others, I do not push work in progress commits. I only push commits that are actually complete. But because this is a personal project and, you know, this is sort of like my backup, you know, like if I push it to GitHub, if something happens to my computer, God forbid, or just even this folder on my computer or something like that, I have that backup pushed to GitHub. And really, there shouldn't be people downloading and using that. And even if they do, and the authentication is not good because it's not best practices yet, it's lacking the hashing, etc. It also doesn't have expiration. I mean, there's a variety of ways it doesn't work. But anyway, they, you know, before this commit, it didn't have any authentication at all. So it's arguably better than it was. Arguably worse too, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, so with that, I think I'm going to call it and we'll be back next time, hopefully tomorrow, but I'm not sure. And we will finish up the authentication bit and then get working on the next bit as well. So thanks, y'all, and I'll see you next time.